February 22, 1944. Berlin, Germany. The sky above the Reich capital was a brilliant winter blue, deceptively peaceful at 28,000 feet, where Hauptmann Werner Mulders led his Jagdgeschwader 53 squadron on a routine patrol. The experienced Luftwaffe ace checked his oxygen mask and scanned the horizon, confident that no Allied bomber could reach this far into German airspace without fighter escorts. They would have to turn back long before reaching Berlin. Another quiet patrol, he thought to himself. Another day of keeping the American bombers at bay. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Mulders and the entire Luftwaffe High Command could not yet comprehend was that this day would mark the beginning of the end for German air superiority. The arrival of a revolutionary aircraft would transform the psychological landscape of aerial warfare over Europe, shattering not just formations, but the very confidence of the Reich's elite pilots. February 1944 marked a critical juncture in the air war over Europe. The Luftwaffe still maintained a formidable force of 1,561 fighters on the Western Front, with approximately 40% concentrated for Reich defense. This included 4 27 Messerschmitt Bf-109G variants and 326 Focke-Wulf FW-190A and FW-190D models distributed among Jagdgeschwader units dedicated to protecting German airspace. The Luftwaffe's tactical doctrine relied heavily on intercepting unescorted bomber formations, which had proven devastatingly effective against the daylight precision bombing campaign of the U.S. 8th Air Force. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler, a 27-year-old veteran with 22 confirmed kills, sat in the cockpit of his Messerschmitt Bf-109G6, designation Yellow 7. The fighter was equipped with a DB605A1 engine producing 1,475 horsepower, giving the aircraft a maximum speed of 387 miles per hour at 28,000 feet. Its armament consisted of one 20mm MG-151 cannon firing through the propeller hub and two 13mm MG-131 machine guns mounted above the engine. Achtung! Achtung! Amerikaner nachhören sich Berlin. Startbereitschaft für alle Staffeln, crackled through his radio. The Americans were approaching Berlin. All squadrons were to prepare for takeoff. Another day, another dance with the flying fortresses, Stigler muttered to himself as he adjusted his flight goggles. He had faced the American B-17s many times before, and while respect for their defensive capabilities ran high among Luftwaffe pilots, the outcome usually favored the German interceptors once the bombers were beyond their fighter escort range. At Luftwaffe headquarters in Berlin, Generalleutnant Adolf Galland studied the radar reports with increasing concern. The Americans are pushing deeper than ever before, he noted to his staff. Their bombers will be vulnerable this far from England. Order all available fighters to intercept. What Galland didn't yet realize was that the tactical equation had fundamentally changed. Meanwhile, 35,000 feet above Germany, Colonel James Howard led his 354th Fighter Group in their North American P-51B Mustangs, escorting B-17s of the 8th Air Force toward Berlin. Howard's aircraft, nicknamed Etta Jean, featured the revolutionary Packard V-1650-7 Merlin engine, a licensed version of the British Rolls-Royce Merlin 61. This power plant produced 1,490 horsepower at 28,000 feet, giving the P-51B a top speed of 440 miles per hour, a full 53 miles per hour faster than the Bf-109G6. More critically, the Mustang carried 269 gallons of fuel in its internal tanks, providing an operational range of 1,650 miles, more than double the Messerschmitt's 724-mile range. Stay sharp, boys, Howard's calm voice transmitted to his pilots. We're making history today. First fighter escort all the way to Berlin. Lieutenant Richard Peterson checked his fuel gauges and oxygen flow. At 24 years old, he had already flown 15 missions but still marveled at the capabilities of his P-51. Command, this is Blue 2. We're showing 64% fuel remaining. We can stay with the bombers all the way to target and back. Roger that, Blue 2, Howard responded. That's why we're flying these beautiful machines. The strategic implications were profound. While the Germans had built their air defense network with the expectation that American fighters could only penetrate about 500 miles into German-controlled territory, the P-51B Mustang's 1,650-mile range meant it could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and beyond, completely invalidating Luftwaffe tactical assumptions. Back in the cockpit of his Bf-109G6, Oberleutnant Stigler listened to the increasingly urgent radio chatter. Multiple Jagdgeschwader units were being vectored toward the incoming bomber stream. He banked his aircraft sharply, climbing to the reported altitude of the American formation. Staffel, form up. Attack formation, he ordered his six-plane element. We'll hit them from above and behind as usual. Watch for stragglers. As the German fighters climbed to intercept height, Hauptmann Mulders spotted the first contrails of the American bomber formation. I count approximately 80 B-17s, altitude 25,000 feet, heading 085. He reported to ground control. Verstanden. Engage at will, came the response. No fighter escorts reported. Repeat, bombers are unescorted according to radar. This intelligence, tragically flawed, was based on the Luftwaffe's experience that American fighter escorts, primarily P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings, invariably turned back well before reaching German territory due to fuel constraints. The Freya radar network had detected the bomber formations but failed to distinguish the smaller fighter signatures flying above and ahead of the B-17s. At the controls of his P-51B, Colonel Howard scanned the sky methodically. Years of combat experience had taught him to notice the smallest details: a glint of sunlight on metal, an unusual cloud disturbance, the faint smoke trail of a German fighter climbing to attack. Bandits, 10 o'clock high, he called. Looks like 109s and 190s forming up. Blue flight, stay with the bombers. Red and yellow flights, let's go introduce ourselves. 18 P-51 Mustangs peeled away from the formation, their Merlin engines throttling up as they climbed to meet the German interceptors. The Mustangs' olive-drab paint schemes blended with the sky, making them difficult to spot until they were dangerously close. Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Meyer, flying as Stigler's wingman, was the first to notice something was wrong. Staffelführer, those are not P-47s, he transmitted urgently. Unknown fighter type at 2 o'clock high. Stigler banked his Messerschmitt to get a better look, momentarily confused by the silhouette approaching his formation. The aircraft was sleeker than a P-47, with a distinctive laminar flow wing and a profile unlike anything he had encountered over German airspace. Was Zum Teufel? What the hell is that? He muttered as recognition slowly dawned. He had seen intelligence photographs of the new American fighter, but had been assured they lacked the range to reach Berlin. Achtung! Mustangs! Break right, break right. The German formation scattered as the first P-51s dove through their ranks. Lieutenant Peterson targeted a Bf-109 that turned directly in front of him. His P-51's 6.50 caliber Browning machine guns, carrying 1,880 rounds total, unleashed a devastating barrage. The German fighter's canopy shattered, and it rolled inverted before spiraling toward the ground 25,000 feet below. Splash 1109, Peterson reported calmly, already searching for his next target. In his cockpit, Hauptmann Mulders experienced a moment of genuine shock as he realized the Americans had achieved what German intelligence had deemed impossible. Control, we are engaged with Mustangs directly over Berlin. Repeat, American escort fighters have reached Berlin. The radio operator's stunned silence lasted several seconds before the reply came. Verstanden. Fall back to defensive positions. Protect the Reich capital at all costs. For Oberleutnant Stigler, the tactical disadvantage became immediately apparent. Attempting to climb away from a pursuing Mustang, he pushed his Bf-109's engine to maximum power. The Daimler-Benz power plant screamed in protest, yet the American fighter continued to close the distance effortlessly. They're faster in the climb, he transmitted to his scattered squadron. Don't try to outrun them upward. Dive away if engaged. Meanwhile, Colonel Howard's voice remained measured despite the intensity of the dogfight. Remember, boys, we've got the altitude, we've got the speed, and we've got the range. Use it all. Don't get suckered into a turning fight with the 109s. The psychological impact of this first encounter was devastating for the Luftwaffe pilots. For years, they had operated under the certainty that their homeland was beyond the reach of Allied fighters. Their tactics against bomber formations had been developed with the assumption of fighter superiority once the escorting P-47s and P-38s turned back. Now, in the skies over their capital, they faced a fighter that could not only match but exceed their aircraft's performance. Lieutenant Walter Krupinski, a rising ace with 56 victories to his credit, found himself in the unusual position of being outmaneuvered. His FW-190A-8, despite its impressive roll rate and diving acceleration, couldn't match the sustained climb performance of the Mustangs. After a harrowing series of defensive maneuvers, he finally managed to disengage by diving toward the cloud layer below. Breathing heavily, he keyed his microphone. "These Mustangs are like nothing we've faced. They can outclimb, outdive, and outrun us. And they're here, over Berlin." The engagement lasted only 12 minutes, but its impact would resonate throughout the Luftwaffe. 7 German fighters were shot down against the loss of just 2 Mustangs. More significantly, the bomber formation proceeded to its target largely unmolested, dropping 1,973 tons of ordnance on Berlin's industrial districts. As the American formation turned westward for the long flight back to England, Colonel Howard took stock of the situation. "All flights report in," he ordered, methodically accounting for each aircraft in his group. The fuel gauges still showed enough for the return journey, the decisive factor that had changed the strategic equation of the air war. On the ground at Tempelhof Airfield, Oberleutnant Stigler's Bf-109 touched down with less than 35 liters of fuel remaining. His hands were shaking as he taxied to the hard stand, not from fear, but from the profound realization that the war had entered a new phase. The debriefing at Luftwaffe headquarters was tense. General Lieutenant Galland faced the assembled pilots, his expression grim. "Tell me everything about these Mustangs," he demanded. "Every detail, every observation. We must adapt our tactics immediately." Stigler stood to address his superiors. "Herr General, the Mustang is faster than our 109s and 190s at all altitudes above 20,000 feet. Its turning radius is comparable to the 109, but its roll rate is superior. Most critically, they clearly have the fuel capacity to escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back." Hauptmann Mulders added his observations. The American pilots were aggressive and confident. They knew they had the performance advantage and exploited it fully. They avoided extended turning engagements where our aircraft might have the advantage. Galland nodded gravely. "The production numbers are equally concerning. Intelligence reports that North American aviation produced 1,750 P-51s in 1943, with production rates now exceeding 700 aircraft per month. By comparison, our combined Bf-109 and FW-190 production last month was only 542 units. The statistics painted a stark picture. While Germany struggled with resource limitations, bombing disruptions, and manpower shortages, American industrial might was reaching its full potential. The P-51 Mustang represented not just a superior fighter, but the overwhelming productive capacity of the American war machine. Lieutenant Carl Schmidt, a young pilot who had survived his first combat mission that day, raised a hand hesitantly. "Herr General, how are we supposed to fight these Mustangs? What tactics should we employ?" Galland's response was blunt. "We must engage only when we have a significant numerical advantage or favorable tactical position. Avoid prolonged engagements. Strike quickly and disengage. And most importantly, we must accelerate the deployment of the Me-262 jet fighter. It is our only hope of regaining air superiority." The psychological effect of the Mustang's appearance over Berlin rippled through the Luftwaffe's fighter force. Pilot diaries and letters from this period reveal a profound shift in morale. Lieutenant Hans Joachim Marseille wrote to his mother on February 25, 1944, "The Americans have a new fighter that can reach us anywhere now. The sense of invulnerability we once felt over our homeland is gone." Some of the younger pilots are hesitant to engage when Mustangs are reported in the area. Indeed, Luftwaffe combat effectiveness noticeably declined in the weeks following this first encounter. Intelligence reports from captured German pilots revealed that many fighter units were instructed to avoid engaging Mustang-escorted bomber formations unless they held at least a 2:1 numerical advantage. For the American pilots, the psychological advantage was equally powerful. Lieutenant Peterson wrote in his combat diary, "The look of surprise on the Jerry pilots' faces when they realized we were Mustangs was priceless. You could almost see them thinking, 'You can't be here. It's impossible.' That moment of hesitation often gave us the edge we needed." By March 1944, the 8th Air Force had 5 fighter groups equipped with the P-51, with more converting from P-47s every month. The combined production of P-51s reached 14,619 aircraft by the war's end, with peak production exceeding 1,800 per month, more than 3 times the maximum monthly output of Bf-109s. The tactical revolution extended beyond mere numbers. The presence of Mustangs over Berlin forced a complete reevaluation of Luftwaffe defensive strategy. General Oberst Hans Jeschneck, chief of the General Staff, ordered the redistribution of fighter units from the Eastern Front and Mediterranean Theater to bolster Reich defense, weakening German air power in those critical areas. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, increasingly desperate, demanded the impossible from his fighter forces. "You must engage the bomber formations regardless of escort," he commanded at a staff conference in March. "The Führer demands that Berlin be protected at all costs." This directive led to catastrophic losses among Luftwaffe fighter units. On March 6, 1944, in an air battle that came to be known as Black Monday, the Luftwaffe lost 88 fighters in a single engagement against Mustang-escorted bombers. For Oberleutnant Stigler, the reality of their situation became clearer with each mission. After narrowly surviving another encounter with Mustangs on March 15th, he confided to his squadron mate, Lieutenant Gustav Rodel, "We are fighting a losing battle. They have better aircraft, more fuel, and an endless supply of replacements. For every pilot we lose, we have 1 replacement, maybe. For every pilot they lose, they have 10 replacements." The industrial disparity was indeed staggering. In 1944, German aircraft production reached its peak with 25,285 aircraft of all types. By comparison, American factories produced 96,318 aircraft that same year, nearly 4 times as many. The Luftwaffe's fighter pilot training program was producing 800 pilots per month against devastating combat losses of 1,000 to 1,200 pilots monthly. Colonel Howard recognized the strategic importance of the psychological advantage his Mustangs had gained. In a memo to 8th Air Force Headquarters dated April 3, 1944, he wrote, "The enemy reacts with visible shock when they encounter our fighters over targets they believed were beyond our range. This moment of disbelief frequently gives our pilots the decisive tactical advantage in initial engagements. I recommend emphasizing this psychological element in tactics briefings." The memo was incorporated into fighter group briefings throughout the 8th Air Force. Pilots were explicitly instructed to exploit the Mustang shock factor by appearing suddenly and aggressively over distant targets where German pilots would not expect to encounter Allied fighters. By late spring 1944, the Luftwaffe had begun to adapt its tactics, though the fundamental performance disadvantage remained. Jagdgeschwader 26 Commander Major Johannes Steinhoff issued new engagement protocols. When confronted with Mustangs, never attempt to climb away. Use the superior roll rate of our FW-190s to dive away and extend at low altitude where the Mustang's performance advantage is minimized. Engage only from positions of advantage and disengage immediately if the situation becomes unfavorable. Despite these adaptations, the Luftwaffe's effectiveness in daylight air defense continued to decline precipitously. Operation Argument, the combined bomber offensive known as Big Week, February 20th to 25th, 1944, marked a turning point in the air war. With Mustang escorts reaching all the way to the targets, American bombers destroyed or severely damaged 75% of Germany's fighter production facilities. For Stigler, the psychological toll became increasingly difficult to bear. After losing his wingman, Karl-Heinz Meyer, during a mission on April 11th. He wrote in his diary, "The odds grow longer each day. We fly 3, sometimes 4 sorties daily, while the Americans seem to have an endless supply of aircraft and pilots. Their Mustangs hunt us now even when we scramble to take off or land. There is no sanctuary left in the Reich's skies." The industrial imbalance extended to fuel as well. While American training programs allocated 180 gallons of aviation fuel per pilot training hour, German programs had been reduced to just 9 gallons. By summer 1944, many Luftwaffe training units were forced to conduct ground instruction only, with minimal actual flight time. Lieutenant Peterson noted this deterioration in enemy pilot quality in a June 1944 mission report. "The Luftwaffe pilots we encounter now lack the skill and aggression of those we faced earlier this year. Many break off combat at the first sign of disadvantage, and their formation discipline has noticeably declined." The decline was quantifiable. In January 1944, before the Mustang's arrival over Berlin, the average Luftwaffe day fighter pilot survived 8.5 combat missions. By August 1944, that average had fallen to just 3.2 missions, creating a devastating cycle of inexperience as skilled veterans were lost and replaced by inadequately trained novices. Major Werner Mulders, once confident in German air superiority, had significantly altered his perspective by mid-1944. In a confidential assessment to Luftwaffe High Command, he wrote, "The appearance of the P-51 Mustang over Berlin in February fundamentally altered the air war. The psychological impact on our pilots cannot be overstated. Where once they flew with confidence in their tactical advantages, they now operate with the constant knowledge that at any moment, even deep within Reich territory, they may be intercepted by an enemy fighter of superior performance." The report continued with a stark assessment. "Many of our younger pilots now launch with the primary objective of survival rather than victory. This defensive mindset has severely compromised our ability to effectively challenge enemy bomber formations." The decline in Luftwaffe effectiveness was not solely due to the Mustang, of course. The combined effects of Allied strategic bombing, resource shortages, and the grinding attrition of experienced pilots all contributed. But the psychological impact of losing air superiority over their own territory was perhaps the most devastating blow to German morale. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring, once the proud leader of the world's most feared air force, had promised Hitler that no enemy bombs would fall on German cities. Now, as P-51 Mustangs escorted heavy bombers deep into the Reich day after day, his promises rang hollow. In a meeting with his fighter commanders in April 1944, Göring refused to accept the new reality. "It's impossible," he shouted. "The Mustang cannot have the range to reach Berlin with enough fuel to fight effectively and return to England." Generalleutnant Galland, risking his career, stood his ground. "Herr Reichsmarschall, I have personally examined the wreckage of 3 downed P-51s. Their fuel system incorporates not only main tanks with greater capacity than our fighters, but also ingenious drop tanks that extend their range dramatically. Indeed, the Luftwaffe Intelligence Service had dramatically underestimated the Mustang's capabilities." A captured intelligence assessment from December 1943 stated, "The North American P-51 represents no significant advancement over existing Allied fighter types. Its operational range will be similar to the P-47 Thunderbolt, limiting its effectiveness to the periphery of Reich airspace." For Oberleutnant Stigler, the contrast between American industrial might and German limitations became painfully clear during a visit to the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg in May 1944. The facility, rebuilt after heavy damage from American bombing raids, was operating at just 42% of its planned capacity. Workers, many of them conscripted laborers from occupied territories, struggled with material shortages and frequent power outages. "How many Bf-109s will you produce this month?" Stigler asked the harried production manager. "Perhaps 180, if we're lucky," came the reply. "Last month we had to halt production for 6 days after the ball-bearing shipment from Schweinfurt was destroyed en route." Stigler thought of the intelligence reports he had seen estimating that North American aviation alone was producing over 700 P-51s monthly from a single factory that had never been bombed. The mathematical reality was inescapable. Lieutenant Erich Hartmann, who would end the war as the highest-scoring ace of all time with 352 confirmed victories, later recalled, "The arrival of the Mustang changed everything. Before, we could intercept the bombers with relative freedom once their shorter-ranged escorts turned back. After the P-51 appeared, we were always fighting at a disadvantage." Lieutenant Peterson, flying his 32nd mission in late April 1944, observed this tactical shift firsthand. "The German fighters are becoming more cautious," he wrote in his mission report. "They orbit at a distance, looking for opportunities to make quick diving attacks on the bomber stream before zooming away. They rarely engage us directly unless they have overwhelming numerical advantage." For the bomber crews, the psychological impact of Mustang escort was equally significant. Staff Sergeant William Parker, a B-17 ball turret gunner with the 91st Bomb Group, described the transformation. "Before the Mustangs started escorting us all the way to target, crossing the German border was like entering the gates of hell. Now, with the little friends staying with us, you can actually focus on the bombing run. The difference in crew confidence is night and day." By June 1944, the statistical evidence of the Mustang's impact was undeniable. 8th Air Force bomber loss rates had declined from an unsustainable 9.8% per mission in October 1943 to 3.5% by May 1944, despite striking deeper targets. German fighter losses, meanwhile, had risen dramatically. In the first 6 months of 1944, the Luftwaffe lost 2,262 fighters in the West, along with 2,566 pilots. Irreplaceable assets given Germany's diminishing training capacity. Faced with this grim reality, the Luftwaffe High Command pinned their hopes on technological solutions. The Me-262 jet fighter, with its revolutionary top speed of 540 miles per hour, might have altered the balance, but persistent engine reliability problems and Hitler's insistence that it be developed primarily as a bomber delayed its operational deployment until it was too late to impact the strategic air war. Another promising development was the FW-190D-9 Dora, a long-nosed variant of the Focke-Wulf fighter powered by the Jumo 213 engine. With a top speed of 426 miles per hour, it could nearly match the P-51D's 437 miles per hour. But like so many German technical developments in the latter stages of the war, the FW-190D-9 arrived too late, and in too few numbers to change the strategic balance. In August 1944, Lieutenant Carl Schmidt was shot down and captured during his third combat mission. In interrogation, he revealed the deteriorating state of Luftwaffe training. "I had only 112 hours of flight time before being assigned to a combat unit, with just 8 hours in the Bf-109G. My first actual firing of the aircraft's weapons occurred during my first combat mission." By comparison, Lieutenant Peterson had accumulated 320 flight hours during his training in the United States, including 75 hours specifically in the P-51, with extensive gunnery practice and tactical training before deploying overseas. By summer 1944, the Luftwaffe had lost effective control of German airspace. American daylight bombing raids struck targets throughout the Reich with ever-decreasing opposition. Even the introduction of the revolutionary Me-262 jet fighter, with its 540 miles per hour top speed, came too late and in too few numbers to reverse the tide. For many Luftwaffe pilots, the psychological journey from confidence to desperation was complete. In October 1944, Hauptmann Gunther Rahl, a 275 victory ace, told his squadron, "We are no longer fighting for victory. We are fighting for time and for the honor of the Luftwaffe. Do not throw your lives away needlessly." When Allied forces reached German soil in early 1945, the Luftwaffe had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent fighting force. The last operational units were struggling with critical fuel shortages, inexperienced pilots, and overwhelming Allied numerical superiority. In his post-war memoirs, Adolf Galland summarized the impact of that first encounter with Mustangs over Berlin. February 1944 marked the moment when the Luftwaffe lost the air war. The appearance of P-51s over the Reich capital demonstrated not only America's technological achievement, but the full weight of their industrial might. Our pilots fought with courage and skill to the end, but against the combination of superior aircraft in overwhelming numbers, the outcome was inevitable. Franz Stigler survived the war, having flown 487 combat missions with 28 confirmed victories. In 1953, he emigrated to Canada, where he eventually met several former American bomber crewmen and fighter pilots. During one such meeting, he was introduced to Richard Peterson, who had completed 72 missions in his P-51 before returning to the United States. Over drinks, the two former adversaries discussed that first encounter over Berlin in February 1944. When we first saw Mustangs that day, Stigler admitted, we couldn't believe our eyes. It was like discovering your opponent in a chess match could suddenly move his pieces anywhere on the board while yours remained restricted. Peterson nodded. Our commanders knew exactly what they were doing. I remember our briefing officer saying, "Gentlemen, today you will rewrite the rules of aerial warfare." For the American strategic bombing campaign, the Mustang as a long-range escort fighter proved decisive. General Carl Spaatz, commander of U.S. strategic air forces in Europe, noted in his final wartime assessment, the P-51 Mustang was the key technological development that enabled our daylight precision bombing strategy to succeed. By providing effective fighter escort all the way to the target and back, it allowed our bombers to operate with acceptable loss rates. The story of the Mustang's arrival over Berlin illustrates a fundamental truth about modern warfare. Psychological impact often amplifies technological advantage. The shock experienced by Luftwaffe pilots when they first encountered Mustangs over their capital created a crisis of confidence that accelerated their defeat. The moment when they realized American fighters could reach them anywhere, with superior performance and in greater numbers, marked the beginning of the end of German air power. In a war defined by industrial production and technological innovation, the P-51 Mustang stands as perhaps the most influential aircraft design of World War II. Its appearance over Berlin in February 1944 didn't just change the tactical situation in the air, it shattered the psychological foundation upon which Luftwaffe strategy had been built, creating a moment of collective panic from which German air defense never fully recovered. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.